Hello and welcome to the Stack Magazine's podcast. My name is Stephen Watson and I run Stack, the magazine club that delivers a different independent publication to your door every month. In this episode, I'm speaking with Chris Harrigan, Editor-in-Chief of The Story, a magazine all about stories and storytelling. He's based in Melbourne, and of course I'm here in London, so we're speaking right at the start of my day and end of his, and I'm really looking forward to digging into this quite unusual but very beautiful and totally absorbing magazine from literally the other side of the world. Chris, thank you very much for making time to speak.
So glad to be here, Stephen, and thank you for waking up early to make this happen. Glad it's you,
good.
not me. I'm sorry about that.
I'll do this before the children are around, and then I'm easy. It's all good. All right. So look, let's jump into the idea for the story. So you called it The Story, helpfully, because it's about stories. So where did this idea for like a magazine about stories and storytelling come from?
Yeah, it's quite a meta idea when you put it like that, and it's called The Story because it's about stories, and it's also stories about stories, which becomes a bit of a snake eating its tail when you try and over explain that. But the idea basically stemmed from the fact that as a magazine writer and someone who's also now works in communications, storytelling is the main tool that we use to tell the story of other things in the world, whether that's a personal story, politics, advertising. But it's not often that storytelling itself is the subject of that storytelling. And we always thought, what an interesting lens to apply. If it was possible to make a magazine about storytelling, what might that look like? And it's taken on different forms over the years before we arrived at what this ended up being. But yeah, it started with that sort of almost, it sounded like a simple idea at the time, to be honest. And then the more we kept trying to explain it to people, we'd get these kind of quizzical looks and we're like, does this not make sense or does it? And we just haven't explained it properly.
So what are some of those other forms then? I've got a print magazine in front of me now, which came out last year. So take us on like the journey of how you got to that.
Yeah, great. Initially the story started as a website, a digital publication. I started working for a communications agency called Fireside, which uses storytelling to help organizations that are trying to do good in the world tell their story, engage with audiences, that sort of thing. And my boss, Ben Hart, who started Fireside, had this idea that perhaps we could, do that thing of telling stories about storytelling, or really try and create a publication that was about all the ways that stories get told. So we sort of start with this belief that really the world runs on stories. And if you can understand how the story is being told, perhaps you can step outside of just being an audience member for that point and actually feel like you've got a handle on, well, who's telling the story and for what reason. So we started making a website also called The Story, which looked to try and just use the tools of storytelling to examine itself. And so that meant a bunch of different things, to be honest. The website was pretty broad in its remit. We would write articles, like some really helpful articles, like how to use storytelling tools and tricks to tell your own story better, whether you're an entrepreneur looking to do a sales pitch or you're just wanting to win an argument at a dinner party. But we also did lots of other weirder and less useful stuff, like we might examine a genre of novel and look at what that has to tell us about geopolitics, or could we profile an author and learn about how they tell stories, or could we just do something really aesthetically pleasing but not all that deep and look at a bunch of different writers' rooms and where they write their stories. So it just became a bit of a catch-all for anyone who either likes reading or maybe they want to tell stories for purpose. The website was really trying to do all those different things. And I think it was a lot of fun making it. Like I live and breathe the internet, maybe to an unhealthy degree. And so being back in the writing for the web was it was a great place to be, but it's also a bit of a treadmill. And because it was a website, we were writing content that suited the internet. So that meant we were writing some stuff that self-help stuff seems to do really well on the internet, that sort of utility-based content. Um, if that helped people, I was really happy with that, but it wasn't, what motivated me to become a writer in the first place. So I was gravitating towards these more unwieldy, longer form, slightly more experimental types of articles. And then eventually we just started to think, well, what if we just leaned into the stuff that interested us? Maybe it wasn't the stuff that did super well, like it wasn't SEO friendly. And then we sort of thought, well, if we're going to become less focused on SEO, like what's less SEO friendly than taking something offline altogether and printing it on a piece of paper and charging people to read it if they can find it at a bookstore. So we decided to blow up the website. I mean, it still exists. We're proud of it. It's still up there. But we thought, let's put our efforts into print because that's, it seems counterintuitive, and B, it's what my background's been in and the background of a lot of, my colleagues here at Fireside. And it's just a passion project. I think we also liked how silly the idea sounded. Like, print now?
Yeah, totally. Yeah. And I think so. I mean, look, so you make the decision to make a print magazine. That's clearly like decision one of like a long road of decisions. So there's this like, so, okay, what sort of thing are we going to make? And I think there's a clue in your editor's letter where you say something like, we're not trying to be a stuffy literary journal. Like there's a sense in this that, you want to tell long and deep stories, but you're not coming from a position of like, I don't know, kind of the sort of, maybe the slightly more like elevated, rarefied, highbrow culture. This magazine feels like it's trying to engage with people on a much more sort of human level.
Yeah, I'm glad you picked up on that. Like when we'd have all these sort of idea sessions here about what the vision was for the magazine, and I kept saying, oh, the stuff I wanted to make was more like that literary kind of intellectual stuff, the weirder, longer form stuff from the website, but just more of that. And then people would sort of look at me and go like, oh, kind of like a literary journal. And I'd say, well, maybe, but no. There are a lot of literary journals I really like, but it's for a certain type of audience. And there's a sense that you might feel like it's sort of being gate kept from you as a reader. That's not for everyone. And it also, magazines to me, the words are obviously important, that goes without saying, but they're a great chance to really play around with the visual nature of it and how tactile they can be. And I've always been drawn to that. And I thought, what if there was a way to sort of combine these sort of more literary ambitions with something that was also super dynamic and fun, and maybe it feels a bit more like a zine in parts. In other parts, maybe it feels a bit more like a book. There's just so many opportunities to try different stuff. And I didn't want to, I guess it was an overabundance of just appetite for mixing stuff up. I was like, can we just combine all of this? And what if there were no rules, no templates? What if we just like went wild?
Right. Yeah. Well, okay. So it feels like maybe the impracticality of print was kind of freeing you a little bit. So there's another line that I really like from the introduction where you say, making a magazine has always been a reckless proposition. Making one in 2025 feels actively delusional. So it's almost like sort of, look, we're not doing this to try to like make a lot of money and kind of, not even necessarily reach a lot of people, but we're doing this because we have this like fixed idea of creating something.
Yeah, that's definitely what was driving us. It was kind of for the hell of it, which isn't like, first of all, we were really passionate about print and we're really passionate about storytelling and writing and designing cool stuff. But the business case wasn't the driving factor. There was no real profit and loss statement attached to this. I mean, there probably is one sitting in a spreadsheet somewhere, but I'm loath to examine it too closely, because the goal, as you say, was not to make money. I mean, it is available for sale. We hope people do buy it. People are buying it, and we're getting really good feedback. But the goal was never blanket coverage, and we just wanted to make something cool. And I mean, to be honest, like, if someone out there read the story, or someone had said that we'd made something cool and they heard about it, and then they went on to think about Fireside and whether they could do something similar with us, and we got a client that way, like, great, perfect. But that's
Mm.
not the driving force behind any of this. That
Yeah,
would just be
yeah.
gravy, like, on top. Yeah.
Sure, sure. Okay, so I mean, we should talk a little bit about Fireside and about like your background and the other people involved in the magazine, because so like you're kind of like Australian indie magazine royalty, like the people making this magazine. So the publishing director is Luz Bannister, creative director is Lara Burke, and so they're the women who, in like the early 2000s, started Frankie magazine together. And I mean, that's like sort of before I started Stack, like years and years ago, when I was first getting into independent magazines, Frankie was one of these things that, I was aware of from the other side of the world. And then, so Frankie magazine started Smith Journal, which is kind of like sort of the men's equivalent. And I think you were editor of Smith Journal.
I was, yeah.
So, okay, so maybe tell us like a little bit about like how did you all come to be working together, and then how did like that work lead into the stuff you're doing now?
When you lay it all out like that chronologically, it seems like there was maybe some master plan, but it's closer to cosmic, well, not coincidence, but it all just that, yeah. There was no plan in the moment. I like you, I heard about Frankie sort of after it first started, and it felt like a real cultural juggernaut, at least, especially here in Australia, I think. And had always been like, oh, who are these cool women who've made this print magazine in an era where that is sort of definitely not happening. Particularly wasn't happening for the kind of women's magazine that it was, didn't exist really. Like, it was sort of, I don't know if Louise would agree with this assessment, but to me, it was like the anti Clio, or yeah, just those glossies. This was an alternative, much more mature, and yeah, like magazine for women. And I guess it must have been 5 or 6 years after it started, I heard rumblings that a male version of Frankie was in the works, and that was Smith Journal. And I was a budding writer at the time. I was mostly working for little websites here and there, little blogs, and just by chance, I got the opportunity to start interning at Smith Journal. I was their first intern, I think, and got to hear, like, Louise is based in a different part of Australia to me, but I got to sit in on meetings, and I was overawed. She was a celebrity. Um, and then, yeah, I loved working at Smith, and I loved just the potential that magazine had. It could actually, it started out as a male Frankie, but it became something kind of totally of its own. And over time, yeah, I became the editor myself, which was a great trajectory from intern to editor. And Louise and Lara, who founded it, they moved on, and Rick, who was the editor when I started. And eventually, over time, like, yeah, print was a ridiculous proposition. Yeah, like when Smith Journal started, and eventually, as successful as it was, it didn't survive. It died just before COVID. Actually, the decision was made to pull the plug. So, which was kind of the end of an era. Frankie's still going, which is amazing. But I left Smith in 2019, and couple of years later, I started working at Fireside. Ben had been a fan of Smith Journal, and he just took a punt and asked if I was available to meet him over coffee, where he pitched me the idea for what became the story. And I thought, I'd had a couple of years out of the magazine making world, and I actually didn't know if I ever wanted to get back into it. Like it's a lot of fun, um, but it's a lot of late nights, and the industry had been through some rocky patches, and I thought maybe I'll just find a simpler life doing something else. Um, but then the opportunity, I also just didn't think I'd get the opportunity again, because who's starting new publications? They're
Mm,
far and few
mm.
between. So I mulled it over, and then I just couldn't get it out of my head. So I said, okay, let's do this. Um, and so I started the story with Ben at Fireside, where I also work a few days a week doing comms, which helps support the magazine. Um, and then a couple of years in, I think I must have connected with Louise on I'm loath to even mention this platform, just because it's something I really don't enjoy spending too much time on. But on LinkedIn, I hadn't been in touch with her for years, and she heard that I was working at Fireside, and she was just wrapping things up with Lunch Lady, which was another magazine that she was working on, and then I just was speaking to Ben. I was like, Louise is really interested in what we were doing, and so they had a meeting, and then I was like, Ben, it would kind of be crazy not to try and get Louise to work for us. Um, so one thing led to another, and yeah, Louise is now on board, and I hadn't seen her since the Frankie days. And we just
Mm.
started talking about magazines and the print days and all the war stories. And she was like, "And you're making another magazine? You're doing the story as a website?" And I'm like, "Yeah, we are." And she's like, "Why?" And I'm like, "Well, I guess we just can't help ourselves." Um, and then when we decided to maybe blow it all up and do print, it was like, well, we've got the perfect person here to come on as a creative co-partner. And um, Lara Burke has never really, like, Lou and her seem like almost conjoined twins. They're not together in the same space physically, but I feel like if they're just really in sync. And I was like, I'd never actually got the opportunity to work with Lara before. She'd left before I edited Smith Journal, and I'd always been, yeah, really eager to do that. And I was like, Lou, do you think we could get Lara in on this? She's like, let me have a word.
So I mean, I think like this puts you in quite an interesting position, and I think, I mean, it's one that I really recognize from, like, I started working in magazines, like, 20 something years ago, and like at that point print was past its heyday, so everything was about, like, kind of, oh really, you're getting into magazines, is that really
Mhm.
a good idea? And now, like, here we are 20 years later, and like sort of like that seems like the kind of good old days. Like
Yeah.
so what, like, you've all like kind of come back together, and now you're working in a magazine again after this like time apart. How does things feel different now? Is there like, does sort of like the media world generally feel different, or when you're getting around a table together, does it really all kind of feel like the same as what you were doing before?
Yeah, it's a good question. When we're getting around the table to talk about what we want to make, it feels exactly like before. Like it feels like we never left, and it's just, if you can channel that energy when you've just got blank pages, and the magazine can be anything. Like that's a really, uh, yeah, that's a really great feeling. Or of course, the blank pages can also end up haunting you in your sleep while you're desperately trying to fill them once you've booked the printer. But in terms of making the thing, no, it's like nothing has changed. In terms of the climate that you're in, like as you say, like I don't think I've worked in publishing when it's ever been healthy. Um,
Mm, mm,
but
mm.
I guess there's always new bottoms to you think you've reached a bottom, and little do you look back on, like, yeah, years later and go, oh, we didn't know how good we had it. And so what I've found really remarkable this time is yeah, just it, even 10 years ago when things were unhealthy, I feel like this model of agencies or brands producing magazines that aren't about the brand, but they're tangentially related, maybe they're sort of spiritual cousins, uh, it was kind of being heralded as like, maybe this is the new model that keeps publishing afloat. Um, and even this time around, I really do feel like we're bucking a trend here. It's not, yeah, I was surprised at kind of how lonely it is out there as an indie mag. And there's heaps of cool stuff being made. But I do get the impression, and you would know this better than me, that indie has meant different things at different points in time, and I don't know if it's ever actually been as indie as it is now.
Well, look, I mean, I think it's. I think you have to be careful to not use indie to just mean somehow not as good. You know, what I mean, like it's like kind of like, it's a magazine, but it doesn't make money. Or like it's a magazine, but it doesn't get read by as many people as
Yeah,
like, you'd
yeah.
expect. And I mean, so years ago, I went to the first IndieCon in, I think it was 2014, and they spent the whole weekend. It's this great conference in Hamburg every year, still doing it now. And for the first one, we spent the whole weekend talking about was ist indie. Like they're trying to kind of like understand what is indie, and the definition they came up with at the time was like the chiefs of the makers. So the people who are like financially responsible for this thing are directly involved in like, kind of writing or laying out pages or like
Mm,
taking photos. And like that's the thing that I still hang on to now, of like, kind of, because that financial independence that
mm.
gives you the freedom to do things that you wouldn't otherwise be able to do. And just from listening to you, it sounds like that's a big
Oh,
part of what attracts all of you to the story.
absolutely. I think you're exactly right. Like it's not an indication of quality, or if it is, it's an indication of maybe that there's a better chance of it being good quality, just because if there aren't those financial, like, yeah, magazines that have had massive firms behind them, heaps of money, that can often be driven by, I don't know. I've at various points felt the pressure of, well, we've got all this advertising coming in, and this article's not going to play well next to that brand. So can we tone that down a little bit? Would the audience, our market research says the audience won't really go for this. So maybe we have to think of a more conservative piece of content to fill this. And I guess the pleasure of an indie mag is like, if you're fulfilling your own ambitions, like, I think those are your KPIs, and
Mm-hmm.
presumably you want people to actually, you'll tell pretty quickly whether people are enjoying it or not. But uh yeah, I've we found it liberating, and we don't have any cover lines on our magazine, which I remember those being even back at Smith Journal, which was not a particularly like, we were never trying to optimize all of that stuff to the nth degree, but like you'd get to the end of a deadline and you're about to send the thing off to print, and you're like, oh, what am I going to possibly put on the front cover as a line to that's really going to shift units? And with this, it's like, well, I don't think any of these stories would work as a cover line, to be honest. And it's quite freeing to be able to go,
Mm.
you know what, we're going to do a 10-page spread just of artworks made by typewriters. Like, for the hell of it. You don't have to justify things the way that you would with, when you're trying to sell, when you need to sell 50,000 copies to.
Yeah. Yeah, no, totally. Well, look, we should talk a bit about the stories in the story. We haven't even got to
Sure.
that yet. I mean, at like the top level, okay, so everything here is about like stories and storytelling. So there's lots of stuff with that kind of writers reflecting on the process of writing, or like or kind of like creation in general. I felt like there was a theme that came out to me of sort of like of actually like of real depth, like as I say, sort of like the magazine looks lovely, and it looks like kind of like it's like lots of bright colors and very friendly. But then, I mean, one of the stories that really stood out to me is what's it called? Grief Breaks the Brain.
Mm.
So this is Patrick Pittman, who actually, as it turns out, he is our developer on Stack and the Mortar.
I
And I
had no
knew
idea.
and so
Yeah.
I knew Patrick was a writer as well, but I had no idea. I mean, he writes in this piece about these a very difficult time that he went through, um, with like, kind of personal tragedy, and how that sort of really gave him writer's block. And then, I recognized this in him, like his like analytical brain kind of goes like, right, let's break this problem down. Let's like see what's happening in my brain that's stopping me from writing here. So, I mean, that would, I love that story.
Yeah.
like what is it that when a story like that came to you, what is it where you're going like, oh, okay, yeah, this is the type of stories that we want to tell?
Yeah. I guess with a piece like that, when I was reaching out to writers, either writers I'd worked with before or writers I've always wanted to work with, and we're just pitching them the idea of the magazine, we didn't have previous issues to show them as examples of what we do. So I was really trying to come up with like potential story ideas that weren't fully formed. I didn't want to sort of box people in and limit their thinking. So I would kind of send out an email saying, we're doing this thing it's about storytelling. It's a little bit meta, but perhaps the following ideas would resonate with you, and we'd love to chat about like how any of these would what you might do with these. And one of the ideas I kept coming back to was this notion of writer's block. I think there's a lot written about writer's block. A lot of it does come from a fairly like uh, utility. Yeah, a lot of it's written to sort of like how do you overcome writer's block. And I was actually, it's ironic, I was less interested in that. I just wanted to hear from writers who had experienced writer's block and were able to. I wanted to know what they wanted to say about it. Because one of the ideas I had for the magazine was we're not going to do stuff that gets to the bottom and solves an issue and is something you can apply. And it was very funny to me that Patrick was like, what if I did a piece that explains how you might be able to solve your writer's block? And I was like, it's not what I wanted. But I was like, Patrick, do you think there could be something like that that's also a bit of a personal reflection? And he was like, oh yeah, because I actually have suffered from writer's block. And I think I know the reason why. And I was like, great. I didn't know he had. I'd worked with Patrick before. He's one of my favorite writers, and he ended up writing this piece. And even just from the first line, I was like, "Oh my God, Patrick!" Without giving it away, there are different types of writer's block, and there's potentially one that can come out of trauma and depression. And he had something very difficult happen in his life. And the notion that he wanted to be so personal and open about that, and then also sort of in a slightly gonzo way try and science his way out of it. I was like, this feels. I don't know what this piece looks like, so let's give it a shot. Um, and it was quite ambitious, as as you might imagine. When he did at various points say, oh, "I'm kind of struggling to write this," and I'm like, "Well, that means you're the man for the job." And
Yeah.
and I was just so happy with how that piece turned out. And yeah, with the story as a website, we'd never really had those personal kind of reflections before, those first person pieces. And this touched on memoir while also being like a science survey.
So, is the plan that stories from the print version are going to go on the website, or are they going to remain separate?
We're going to publish, this is an ongoing debate, mostly a debate within myself, because on the one hand, I'm really protective of the print magazine, and we've spent so much time not just working on the words, but how they appear on the page. And I like the notion that you sort of have to sit down uninterrupted. You're not on a screen while you really sink into these pieces. On the other hand, some of these pieces are just so damn good. I want as many people to read them as possible. And distribution as an indie mag, as any of your other interview subjects could tell you, it's quite difficult. And so I've got people in America and in parts of Europe who are emailing me, and they're like, "Where can I get my hands on this?" And I'm like, "Well, can you come to Australia?" Thankfully, we do have some distribution now in North America and in Europe, and that is expanding. But we're never going to be in every newsagent or every bookstore. So the plan is over the course of this year to sort of cherry pick some of the pieces I think would work best digitally. And there are quite a few of those actually. And then there are other pieces I think I just want to keep for print.
And so, because I was talking to Louise about this before, and like, kind of, the difficulty of getting a magazine out there, and she said that she thinks maybe this is just like a one-shot thing, like this is like the first issue of the story, and quite possibly the last print issue of the story as well.
Yeah, it may well be. I think Louise is a bit more definitive about that than I am. I think after making magazines for so long, people can develop complicated feelings about them, and like, to be frank, like, we put all of our effort into this first issue, and I think the idea has always been, like, if this resonates really well out there in the world, and if we're still enjoying it, then yeah, issue 2 will come when issue 2 comes. But also we're kind of agnostic about form. We know that we want to keep doing creative projects here at Fireside, and last year that looked like making a print magazine. The story could take on many different forms. Like, it could look like, it could be audio storytelling. It could be, maybe it could be something more zine-like. We're always going to keep iterating, and we're going to keep probably telling stories in a creative way. Um, yeah, the story actually started as an idea of, like, should we do an art project? And if so, what does that art project look like? And yeah, then we decided that it should be an art project about storytelling. But yeah, we're just going to, it feels a bit funny to release a magazine and say it's one of one, because in what way is that not a book then, I suppose? But it was definitely made with the mindset of it being a magazine, and we're just going to let it take on the life that it wants to lead for itself.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
Well,
watch
look,
this space, I say. There'll definitely be more stuff out there.
whatever that form is, I'm going to be looking forward to reading or listening or watching or whatever that requires.
Yeah,
I think
great.
it's a really beautiful thing. So thank you again for taking the time to tell me about it.
Thank you so much, Stephen. It's been a pleasure.